Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Interim Working Group on Food, Water, and Other Supplies. I am Teresa Mato, and I'm co-chairing this working group with Representative Ilagan. I'd like to thank my co-chair for his work on this project and for our fellow members, Representatives Garcia, Gates, and Martinez Onishi, who are excused. Thank you, Representative Sayana and Representative Tam, for being here today. So we are meeting in room 309, and it is just about 2 p.m. or 2:01, and we have a really brief presentation to go through to let you know what we've been working on. So our charter, pursuant to House Rule 17 and House Resolution 224, Speaker Saiki established these interim House working groups charged with evaluating specific topics related to the Maui wildfires and making recommendations for appropriate legislative action. The purpose of our Food, Water, and Other Supply Working Group is to evaluate the availability and distribution of food and other necessary supplies for displaced individuals and families, and to prepare recommendations for appropriate legislative action if deemed necessary. So the purpose of today's meeting is to receive public input on our working group's draft report. So our methods, our working group solicited recommendations from government officials and agencies and conducted site visits of food distribution facilities. Thank you for coordinating those, Co-Chair. We surveyed members of the ESF6, comprised of professionals from federal to state to county level and people performing direct relief work on Maui. In addition to the professionals, we asked the community for their input and performed a public survey to listen to the people directly, hear their ideas and solutions, and also obtain feedback on proposed solutions. Thank you. So some of our findings. Finding 1, distribution management plan oversight. Hawaii currently lacks a formalized system for the supervision of its distribution management plan, or DMP. The absence of the oversight mechanism can lead to inefficiencies in disaster response, potential misallocation of resources, and a lack of transparency in the decision-making process. Our first recommendation as a working group is the state should establish a comprehensive distribution management plan that encompasses all disasters and topics. This plan should also ensure that Haima and the counties have a coordinated plan. This could be implemented either by mandating the establishment of a comprehensive DMP under state law or by establishing a framework for the plan to be reviewed and approved by an advisory board. Finding 2, food bank reserves. Food banks have filled a critical need during disaster situations, including Hurricane Iniki, COVID-19, as well as Lahaina Maui wildfires. A clear majority of the responders surveyed by the Food Water Supply Working Group supported increasing food bank reserves and pre-authorizing emergency funding for disaster readiness. The recommendation is the state should set aside funding to ensure that food banks have adequate storage capacity, labor, and food reserves for its normal and emergency operations. So this is just an example of a survey confirmation result. Do you support increasing food bank reserves for disaster readiness? As you can see, over 90% of the respondents agreed with that suggestion. I won't go through all of the survey results, but if you're interested, they can be found on our working group webpage. So finding number 3, food resiliency, right to garden. So continued economic stress persists after a disaster, requiring food support. Hawaii spends up to $3 billion a year importing more than 80% of its food. Recommendation is that the state should enact a right to garden law that protects an individual's right to grow food where they live. However, consideration should be given to various property matters, including zoning, property type, community associations, and rental agreements. Hot food donation standards is finding number 4. Hot food donations are a critical resource for evacuees following a disaster event. Therefore, the recommendation is the Department of Health should conduct outreach after disasters to ensure that food establishments understand the safety standards for safely donating hot foods. Recommendation finding number 5, emergency prescription refills. During times of natural disasters or public health emergencies, there may be significant challenges that impede a patient's ability to receive a necessary prescription with sufficient rapidity. Therefore, the recommendation is the state should enact a law to allow pharmacists to provide medication to patients without interruption during emergencies, without a doctor's authorization, ensuring uninterrupted medication access for patients. Finding 6, emergency surge personnel. Following a disaster, government agencies may be required to perform emergency functions in addition to normal core functions. Emergency personnel surge capabilities are needed to assist governmental emergency response. The recommendation is the state should implement programs to provide personnel support for disaster response. This could include cross-training state employees for temporary surge deployments for critical services, funding new positions, and creating a mechanism to surge staffing when needed to support response and recovery efforts. So for next steps, we'll review the testimony. Then we'll hear in-person and Zoom testimony. I'm so glad to see so many of you here today. Thank you for coming. In the following weeks, our working group will discuss the testimony we've received and any changes that may be necessary for our final report. Our final report will be submitted to House leadership on December 15th. And then as a working group, we may decide to draft legislation for the upcoming 2024 legislative session. So now we move on to testimony. So we have received 16 pieces of written testimony, 1 from an individual and 15 from organizations and departments. And let's see. Do we have Leimomi Kong present? No, okay, that was in person. Where am I? Okay. Okay. Is Ted Ralston present? Sure. Please come on up. Thank you for being here.
To Chair Zamato and Iligan and members of the Hawaii House Working Group on Food, Water, and Other Supplies. Pardon me. A Hawaii Pacific Advisory Group, which I represent, is organized under an NHO, Native Hawaiian organization called Hawaii Pacific Foundation, and we welcome the opportunity to comment on what we read in your report. I'd like to introduce 2 other people from our group here, Karen Owana and George Purdy. George is our island man on Maui, actually from Lanai, but he's doing service on Lanai right now, and Karen is here in Honolulu. We're expecting Skip Vincent to join us, who's our CEO. There's perfect timing. Here's Skip. Okay, so who we are and why we care is really outlined in the report we submitted online. But we focus on fire intelligence, on disaster logistics, on personnel safety, regenerative reconstruction, and community inclusiveness. That's what we pay attention to. And we'd really invite anybody from your team to join us in our 3 times weekly Zoom call-ups, tag-ups, if anybody would like to just check it out once or twice. Our advisory group has read your working group report. We saw the recommendations again coming up here just now. We've seen them. We've actually sensed the same things you sensed in maybe different forms. But we actually interpreted your set of recommendations as symptoms of enterprise gaps and failures at an enterprise or a higher level. And if we fix them at the lower level, that doesn't guarantee they're going to be fixed for the next event or fixed in total. We got to fix them at the enterprise level. So it is our idea that we're going to have to work these problems at the enterprise level. So our group strongly recommends that the legislature fund improvements in emergency management capability, which you kind of outlined anyway, and we do that by creating system modernization projects. And we're going to start at the top. Now, of course, we're all on notice, as you kind of pointed out, that the unprecedented is now the normal, the new normal. So we got to be ready. Everybody's got this obligation. So we made 5 recommendations. We pass them on to you here. We think this emergency management system modernization program should include, number 1, the establishment of a fire and disaster intelligence network. This is a collection of sensors and communication systems and intelligent analysis that really tells us what's going on, not just after the thing has happened, but even before it's happened, such as fuel accumulation and such that we would know about in wildfires. This allows the leaders to make informed, timely decisions, and we shouldn't be shy of exploiting new technologies. There's a lot of technology out there that we can incorporate. Unmanned drones are a big factor, air, land, and actually sea. LiDAR and hyperspectral sensors tell you a lot about the environment that we can't get through our eyes or our cameras. Very important information. Predictive analytics are coming along to let you forecast what's going to happen, what direction it's going to happen, and where to intercept a firehead or a water situation or landfall. And expressive AI is really useful in helping people see the picture and getting them to understand the plan and what actions they should take. Those are all part of a fire disaster intelligence network, which would give our leaders information they can trust and act upon. The second thing we've got to do is really enforce and put in place a unified command structure, which provides an operational authority at a high level that pulls everybody together and has all objectives aligned towards a common outcome. That's what we didn't see in this particular activity. This gives us the rapid response with timely, accurate, and actionable communication channels to the public, among other things, so people aren't misinformed as we move forward here. The third thing we're looking at is a development of a structured emergency logistics system. You talked about that in what you highlighted here. A structured emergency logistics system to be operated by State Department of Transportation. Now, we haven't called them up and told them that yet, but I think that's something we need to do. DOT has all the ports and harbors that make logistics happen in Hawaii. They're one step away from actually managing logistics if we can help them and get them going in that direction. This would expedite the inbound cargo and make sure the distribution is prioritized and aimed in the location it needs to be. As you all know, we had an excess of donated clothes and dog food early on in this exercise, and we had a sparse of PPE. In fact, our organization has currently contributed about $100,000 in PPE because there was no other way to get it. So how can we miss getting PPE understood as a critical resource and distributed in this kind of an event? I don't get that. So emergency logistics is a big deal. That will take a lot of load off people if we can get the log to go right. The fourth item is that we need to adopt developments in communication. There's satellite communication. There's overhead means of communication. We've got to keep the communications up and running. Power is an important issue as well. Bioremediation is going to come into the picture very soon for us here. And regenerative reconstruction. Regenerative reconstruction. So we construct in a way that the resulting rebuild is stronger than what we had in the first place. And we're fireproof and we're ready to handle emergencies. And last is the incorporation of island intelligence in basically reshaping the FEMA-oriented emergency functions we've been told to use so that they align with the unique cultural, linguistic, and knowledge bases that we have here in the islands. Just heard about some of those this morning in another meeting that surprised us as to how many times FEMA might misinterpret something because they don't understand our names. And they look at the say like Keoki and George, two different guys, same guy. So anyway, there's these issues that we have to think about that would come from making sure we fully incorporate community involvement. And that's it. That's our 5 recommendations. We do believe that those embrace all the things you talked about, and they start at the higher level so we can work them down and get them done right. So we would be very happy and delighted to work with you in legislation, and contact information is here, and we're standing by to help.
Mahalo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Members, do you have any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Next, I'd like to call Francis Empeno, please.
Hello, my name is Francis Empeno. I'm with the Hawaii Department of Agriculture. Chairperson Hurd and Deputy Director Chida could not make it today, so I'm testifying on behalf of the department. The department would like to stand on its written testimony with comments, specifically on 3 of the 6 recommendations that you have in your interim report.
Members, any questions?
Any questions after?
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Hunter Haviland? Is he present on Zoom?
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Aloha, chairs. My name is Hunter Happelin. I'm a food and agricultural systems planner as well as a with a background in disaster management. And I submitted an email, which it looks like made it into the testimony, but wanted to provide some additional perspectives about some of the proposed items in your report, as well as some additional aspects I think are important to consider. In the context of the disaster management plan, distribution management plan, excuse me, I think it's important to emphasize not just the mechanisms or the material good transfer, but also look into other planning approaches, namely multi-agency emergency feeding support plans, which is a framework developed by the Red Cross and has been used across the country for bridging between community response efforts, namely food banks, key feeding organizations, and government entities, and has been applied both at county levels, state levels, and in some cases even regionally. So we were able to get a feeding plan based off of that framework written with Hawaii County during COVID, and I would recommend that at the other counties, as well as the state Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, also consider adopting that framework. In 2013, HIEMA had explored doing so, but seemingly had not, I've been unable to find whether or not that effort was completed, and based off of my knowledge of their planning, it has not happened. And so I think it's a really important mechanism, these multi-agency plans, to bridge, again, as I said, community efforts with government response programs. In terms of the food bank reserves, I think there's a critical opportunity to support food banks in a way that our state has long been unique in not providing structural support for that critical social safety net. And so providing funding for food bank infrastructure, as well as for partner agency cold storage, is a critical opportunity to enable those who've been really leading the charge in terms of ensuring household food security are provided with funding resources that they need to continue that important work. I'd also add that in some of the testimony, I believe there had been mention of the debucks effort, and during the COVID pandemic, there previously had been debucks funding that was released. And I think it's quite critical for this group, or at least somebody, to review as a hot wash, which is a post-action process in disaster management, to understand why it was that debucks funding was pulled from our communities, essentially leaving the food basket, who was previously had been allocated to receive that funding, to come up with the match that was necessary to receive the federal funds. And so that's another sort of key aspect that I think is important to be reviewing in terms of how our state structurally does or does not provide provide for support of these critical infrastructures. In terms of emergency surge personnel, there is an approach in Alaska that utilizes both the strategic catastrophic disaster food reserves that allow for essentially a subsidy of additional storage to happen within certain grocers or certain markets, that comes with a training process and a subsidy for their staff to be trained as well as resourced, so that, say, for example, you needed a 14-day food reserve, you knew that that was at your home so that you could show up to work in the event of a disaster. And I think applying and adapting that type of an effort here could go far to help both increase the latent storage capacity that we have in the state, which there is a history for. It's something that grocers had done from the 40s to the 70s over the course of many dock strikes. It can conceivably increase food price, and so looking at the mechanisms by which the state can subsidize that effort to ensure that it does not have negative impacts on household food access is a critical piece of this work. In terms of, and attempting to wrap it up here, some other key pieces that I think are critical to review and ideally can be incorporated into future bills are the development of community assessments for public health emergency response, which is a CDC framework for the rapid surveying of household emergency preparedness or other approaches. Kauai County has, through their Department of Health office, run a number of studies over the course of years and has a much better sense than any other county of the extent to which there are the volume of residents that have the 3, 7, or 14-day recommended amount of storage. That's a critical planning assumption that impacts both state emergency management agents, the emergency management agency, the county agencies, as well as the efforts of food banks in their planning for what might be needed during response. Finally, I would just add that the farm to food bank type opportunities that that we pursued as SB 430 during the last session, I think are really a critical means to increase the relationship between producers across the state and food banks. And this is not just, as the advocacy director with the Hawaii Farmers Union, I of course have a perspective about supporting producers that's important there, but we also know from the impact survey work done subsequent to the fires that 80% of producers who responded to our survey said that they lost markets, and 50% of the producers that responded said they lost 75 to 100% of their market. So that means there's a stranded food asset that it also has a continuing and cascading economic impact on our rural, particularly our rural households, families, and communities that could be addressed through farm to food bank programming, and particularly an earmark within an emergency feeding cache that could be rapidly deployed during crisis. Happy to discuss any of this further, and excited to see the work that's come out of the working group, and look forward to the next session with you all. Thank you.
Mahalo. Thank you, Hunter. Before we continue, I'd like to acknowledge Representative Gates. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Mahalo.
Moving on, I'd like to call Lauren Ziebel. Sorry if I butchered your name.
Good timing, actually. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Hawaii Food Industry Association, which represents approximately 200 food suppliers, distributors, and retailers in our state. And we just wanted to express our gratitude for the work you've done so far on this very important issue that is near and dear to our heart. We had a few suggestions. Actually, I agreed with a lot of what the previous testifier said, so I don't want to reiterate a lot of it, but I didn't put this in my testimony, but I agree that funding debucks is absolutely critical and is really important for people to be nourished, but also for them to be more likely to have a larger supply of food at their home, which is one of the things that we're asking of people, which may or may not be a realistic expectation, and that's something I think we should also look into. But in our testimony, we stated designated and funded non-perishable food storage facilities should be increased. A lot of other states that experience a lot more natural disasters, they do this. It's a great program, and it works really well. It helps the public know that there is food available, so there's less panic. And we really recommend including both public and private sector operators who possess the necessary expertise in food storage and distribution. We have a lot of members that haven't necessarily been tapped to help, but they have a great deal of expertise in food storage, food distribution, and could potentially be great allies for the state to work with and the counties. The second thing we recommended was pre-designated mass feeding sites, and to establish those contracts in advance with both private sector and nonprofit operators who have expertise in this area. And the third one was a centralized information hub so that we can get clear understanding of what is needed and who to contact to gain access to disaster areas and mass feeding centers. That was a big problem that I received a lot of calls from my members about how to get into the disaster area. There was a lot of conflicting information about that. I had to rely on personal contacts, calling them to try to get major companies that have food into these areas. And to me, I think that was pretty problematic and should definitely be addressed before the next disaster happens. And also just, we have a lot of members that have expertise in this area, and I think they'd love to be a part of this conversation and to kind of help move the ball forward on funding what needs to be funded to make sure that we have more food available on island in the event of a disaster, and that we know exactly who is going to distribute it and where they're going to distribute it in advance would be a really big improvement over the current situation. So thank you very much for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Is Sandy Wong available on Zoom? Okay, moving on. Dr. Genesis Young, please go ahead.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me all right?
Good afternoon, Dr. Young. Thank you for attending today. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So, I'm loving what everyone's saying today about creating more resilience in the face of our disasters here. I'm on Maui. On the North Shore in Kahakaloa. And what I'm hearing from Ted was the incident command system which involves commander, planning and intelligence, operations, logistics, and information, doesn't seem to be as well worked out here as it normally is. At least that's what I witnessed, but not knowing exactly what's going on. It's always been a problem, I think, here since the fire. So needing more information and having that central information hub, which I believe the last speaker touched on as well. It still is a need. We do have the Maui Nui Strong website, but it's not very clear about, for me as a website, what's actually going on and what needs to happen and what the sort of the schedules are of what's going on. So right from the beginning, we've had this problem with that. But here, I'm really here today to talk mostly about food. Making sure we have food security has always been a problem because we import 80% of our food. And I know there's a right to garden is on this particular agenda today, and I definitely support that. I know that the HOAs and AOAs that I've been involved with here on Maui prohibit gardening. And if we had more victory gardens, if you like, or local gardening going on, we'd be more resilient. We'd use less of our food. And those also, once we can encourage those by preventing HOAs and AOAs from preventing people growing their own food, I think that's a critical first step. Then we could actually work on how that extra food could be then distributed to food banks and to the local distribution network, which all of our food systems need to be improved. We don't have enough local agriculture going on, and that's one way I think to have resiliency is to have local food grown in everybody's backyard and encouraging that. And this is one way I think to begin to encourage that is by having a right to garden ordinance, which many states already have, or a few states already have. We should be able to grow food in our gardens, whether we rent or own. Shouldn't be stopped by any organization that's, come on, not growing your own food, that's ridiculous. So anyway, and supporting the food banks, I also agree with to have more support for food banks and have more food banked here in our islands, in our state would be important. So thank you for this draft food, water, and other supply working group. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for allowing me to have this time to speak.
Thank you. Is Rocky Mold available? Is he here or on Zoom?
Hello, yes.
Hi, please go ahead.
Thank you, co-chairs and members of the working group. My name is Rocky Mold. I'm the executive director of the Hawaii Solar Energy Association. I represent the solar industry here in Hawaii, the folks that install solar panels and energy storage on homes, and also the manufacturers that make the equipment. I've submitted written testimony, and I'll stand on that. And I'll just like to add that the solar industry sort of sprang into action and went to work installing solar power generators and microgrids for the disaster response at many of the distribution centers over in West Maui, at Napili Park, at Pohaku Park or S-Turns, at Honokawai Park, at various private residences. Solar and energy storage units were installed that were providing clean, quiet, renewable energy and electricity that was allowing people to stay in touch with their families, to keep food good, to keep medical supplies cold, etc. I actually went over to Maui in early first week of September to take a look at what some of the work that was going on. And when I went to a distribution center at Pohaku Park where we'd installed a system for them that was powering a refrigeration truck and electricity at this distribution center. The ER nurse that was at the medical tent over there approached me and said, "Oh, are you from the solar industry? Thank you so much for installing this solar system that's providing power. Before you arrived, we had diesel generators that were providing us power, and the exhaust from that diesel generation was wafting into the tent. And what we noticed was the blood pressure readings of our patients went down considerably after the solar energy went in. As you can imagine, diesel, the regular playbook is to come in with diesel generators to provide power. Power is necessary. But for diesel, there is this unintended consequence, which it wafts exhaust into the air. And the particulate matter 2.5 in particular that is part of diesel exhaust that is a known killer. There was a study done in 2021 by Harvard University, the University of Birmingham, and the University of Leicester that attributed 8.7 million deaths a year to particulate matter 2.5 diesel exhaust. And in particular, this exhaust hits children even harder because they have newer lungs, and the exhaust is a larger portion of their body weight. So this is to say, power is necessary, electricity is necessary, but if you can, let's provide that in a clean, exhaust-free manner if we can for our folks that have already been through enough trauma, with what they've experienced. So just wanted to add that. Our testimony is there. I'm here for questions. Thank you so much for doing this work. It is so important.
Mahalo for your testimony. Is Amy Marvin present on Zoom? No?
Aloha.
Please go ahead, Amy.
Hi, co-chairs, members of the committee. I'm Amy Miller Marvin. I'm the president and CEO of Hawaii Food Bank. And we're really grateful that you are undertaking this important work and happy to provide some comments. I did submit written testimony, but I wanted to just emphasize three things, and I know several other testifiers have also spoken about these. Obviously, it would be really amazing to have additional funds that would both help build up our reserves for non-perishable items that would allow us to respond in a larger way if supply chains were cut off. So that's one big issue, both in terms of storage capacity and then also funds to purchase and distribute food. We also believe really strongly in the Farm to Food Bank program and investing in local agriculture. I think the more that we can do to support local agriculture, become more resilient, we produce more food locally, and have more lands under direct management, which could have helped to stop the spread of the fire. But Hawaii Food Bank and the other food banks across the state have been working hand in hand with agriculture, and it's just been such a great opportunity to get good, fresh, local produce to those that we serve. Right now, we're serving about 1 in 6 Hawaii residents is food insecure, and so we've been distributing non-perishables, produce, local foods, and it makes a huge difference for our families. So that's another area where we really hope the state can continue to invest. And then the last piece is really around what food insecurity is like. So we expect right now families to have 14 days supply of food and water on hand in case of major emergency. And we know food insecure families are not able to meet that need. We've had situations before where we distributed emergency foods in advance. Hey, this is in advance of hurricane season. Here's some food that you can keep. And a week later, food is gone because people need to eat. It's something we think about it as the everyday emergency of food insecurity. So we also believe that really to create a more resilient community, we have to invest in people today to make sure that we have less need on a daily basis. If people had more reserves at home, and there's lots of different ways to do this, but one is through regular support of the food bank so we can ensure that people have enough to eat every day and are more likely to have stronger reserves within the household to last potentially a few days before they can get help. But I'm happy to answer any questions, and thank you so much for the opportunity to testify.
Mahalo, Amy, for your testimony. I'd like to call Krishna Bayudan. Come on up.
Hi everyone, my name is Krishna Bayudan, and I was born and raised on Maui, residing in Lahaina for my whole life. I'm also a community organizer for the Hawaii Workers Center, and I'm here to shed light on the critical issues of food, water, and other supplies the Lahaina fire has brought to my attention. Thanks to our community hubs put on by the community, there is a wide availability and distribution of food, water, and other supplies now. My family and friends frequent these hubs, and we can all say they have lessened our burdens. I urge the community and organizations and other governmental agencies to continue providing funds or donations to these hubs as we persist through this healing and rebuilding process. However, the bigger issue at hand is the fragility of Hawaii's food systems and their link to wildfire risk. The Lahaina fire was a catastrophic event that had a profound impact on our community. The combination of hot, semi-arid conditions and dry vegetation created the perfect arrangements for the wildfire to spread rapidly, causing widespread destruction. The devastating events that unfolded in Lahaina serve as a stark reminder of the urgent need for legislative action to promote traditional Hawaiian farming practices, not only to mitigate the risk of future wildfires, but also to ensure the well-being of Lahaina residents by providing them with locally grown food. Lahaina, like the rest of the state of Hawaii, has become increasingly dependent on imported food sources, leaving us susceptible to disruptions in the supply chain. The couple of weeks following the fire, I remember the transportation routes were disrupted and caused food supply shortages. So there was a lot of traffic going from like Kahului to Lahaina, and a bunch of people like from the community coming together to do supply runs for families that were stranded on the west side. The situation underscores the importance of integrating traditional Hawaiian ahupua'a concepts back into our food systems, as they were inherently sustainable and resilient. Legislation aimed at encouraging and preserving these traditional farming practices is vital to Lahaina's future. Such legislation can incentivize farmers to plant native Hawaiian foliage in dry brush areas of Lahaina, provide financial support for traditional Hawaiian farming initiatives, and promote education and training for the next generation of farmers. By doing so, we can not only safeguard our food security, but also, again, mitigate wildfire risks. The Lahaina fire serves as a pressing reminder of the consequences of climate change and the need for proactive measures to protect our community. Let us honor Hawaiian culture and work together to build a more sustainable, self-reliant, and resilient future for Lahaina and the rest of the state. The passage of legislation that encourages traditional Hawaiian farming practices is not just an option, it is a necessity for our well-being and for the generations to come. Together, we can make a difference and ensure that Lahaina and the rest of the state sustains in the face of adversity. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to call Liza Ryan Gill if she's present. On Zoom. Please go ahead, Liza.
I apologize. I'm going to turn off my video because I am heading west on H1 right now. So I represent the Hawaii Coalition for Immigrant Rights, about 30 immigrant-serving and immigrant-led organizations. We've been actively involved in serving limited English proficient communities and Maui survivors. And so one of the issues that I saw in this report is something that we've been raising, which is that language access is not being included in much of the response, despite the fact that it is not priority 5 or 6, it is pre-1. If folks don't understand where they can receive food or how they can receive it, then they're not going to receive it. And so one of the issues that we have been seeing is that some individuals from immigrant communities may arrive at like a feeding center, but as far as signing up for things like Disaster SNAP or WIC, they are really struggling to get into longer-term feeding programs because this outreach is not in a language that is accessible to them, and they need support in applying for those programs. So that's an issue that we'd like to bring up. And as far as legislative solutions that we're looking at is that when it came to Haima and the response in Maui, it was really, and language access, it was really, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And there was no plan for language access, and so we failed in response. And many families are still now only just making contact with FEMA or any other government agency to be able to receive longer-term support. And so we need to incorporate a full-time language access person within in the HAIMA structure to make sure that our feeding programs and food and water and other supplies are language accessible to the, in the case of Lahaina fire survivors, more than 30% that were limited. So we're just asking for more understanding, and it's not in any one of the committees that is specifically addressing language access because it touches each one of those, but we would like to go deeper on that issue. And we provided testimony, and we just thank you for holding these meetings and giving us time to share some reflections that we've seen on the ground. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Liza. So now I'd like to open this up for members. Oh, and I'd also like to recognize Representative Onishi. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'd like to open it up for questions from members for any of the Zoom testifiers before we move on to testimony from the room. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay, now I'd like to open it up for testimony for those present here in the room.
Oh, actually, sorry, the Hawaii Food Bank was on Zoom, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I do have some questions for that.
Okay. That would have been Lauren. No, that was Amy. Thank you.
Amy. Hi, aloha.
Aloha.
Sorry about that, Amy. Go ahead.
Thank you for your testimony. So I think according to your written testimony, a Hawaii Food Bank currently maintains about 1 to 1.5 million pounds of food, translating about roughly, 3 weeks of supply during normal times. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So does this reserve fluctuate much during the year?
It does some. So there are times of year that we are closer to 1.5 million pounds. There have been a few times we dip below 1 million pounds, but that's pretty rare. We're usually in that window.
Okay. So over the course of this past, say, 5 years, what have you seen this reserve look like? Has it been decreasing over time? Has it maintained about 1 to 1.5 million?
Well, I've been with the food bank for about 2.5 years, so I can't speak about prior to the pandemic, although my understanding is food bank generally maintained a reserve about 3 weeks. I will say that our business model has shifted pretty dramatically. Prior to the pandemic, we relied almost exclusively on donated food, and we had a very small food purchase budget. Now, with the pandemic and this real increase in need, 1 to 1.5 million pounds is still about 3 weeks of food, but it's much more food than prior to the pandemic. So I believe prior to the pandemic, 1 million pounds was maybe the maximum we would hold at any given time.
Okay.
And now we work hard to be able to maintain at those levels.
Okay.
So that's been our goal.
Yeah, and it sounds like from your testimony and others, the current reserve within the food bank is insufficient or inadequate to respond to a major disaster like the Maui wildfires. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
So especially here on Oahu, we have about 1 million people. We serve on this island about 120,000 people a month on average.
So what would you estimate to be an adequate amount of food reserve, measured in, pounds or, 3 weeks or a month worth of food supply?
So we're working on this right now. We've been meeting with the City and County of Honolulu Department of Emergency Management to come up with that number. I don't think we can answer that with any real specificity yet. I would say, we're thinking probably on the order of 3 to 4 times as much food would be useful, because if all of a sudden everyone is affected, right, our 3-week reserve only will last us a couple of days because so many more people will have needs. So our goal is to work together with HAIMA, with the city and county, to understand where food is, not just in our reserves, but with FEMA, with the retailers, with the distributors. Where is food across the island? How will people get access to that food? And what gap do we need to fill? And how many days would we need to be able to supply X number of people before more food would be able to be brought in? So that's what we're looking at right now. But we do think at least 3 to 4 times what we have today would be necessary.
I assume this discussion that you're having or report will also include perhaps potential locations for additional warehouses. Would that be correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Onishi?
Yes, I have a follow-up question. So your written testimony, is that statewide numbers?
So we directly serve the islands of Oahu and Kauai. So those numbers are for those two islands. Maui Food Bank serves Maui County, and the Food Basket serves Hawaii Islands. And they're great partners. We can get those numbers for you as well.
So do you have a breakdown between Oahu and Kauai?
Between Oahu and Kauai, we have about 1 to 1.5 million pounds of food. Usually on Kauai, we usually have maybe 300,000 pounds at any given time.
So about a quarter of the food you have stored?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, members? Do we have anyone else on Zoom waiting to testify? Okay. Will do, thank you. Is anyone in the room that has not signed up that would like to testify? Seeing none. Members, any further questions for any of our testifiers? Yes, Representative Tam.
Yeah, I have a question for the Department of Agriculture.
Frank.
So in your testimony, you listed in the department's testimony, you listed $15 million in general funding for food bank reserves. Does that include property acquisition and space for any of these food?
The $50 million request for general funding is primarily for the acquisition of food products for the Hawaii Food Bank, specifically for food that farmers have bumper crop for, which is like a surplus of growth of food.
So if we ever needed more space, to store the food because there's inadequate space, how would that be solved then?
That specific question I'm unable to answer at this time, but I can get back to you with an answer.
Thank you. Just one follow-up question.
Sure.
We heard about language access. Does the department have any guidelines that has been translated or any way to translate any of to basically help with language access for some of our individuals that are not proficient in English?
Our Hawaii Department of Agriculture website does have options in many different languages to adhere to Title VI at the top of our website for language access.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, yes, Representative Sayama.
Thank you. I actually have a follow-up for Department of Agriculture. Thank you. I'm just curious, do you know how much funding the Farm to Food Bank program currently receives?
That I do not have right now, but I can get back to your office with an answer.
Okay, a follow-up to that. Do you know how much food in dollar amounts does the Farm to Food Bank program purchase from local, farms?
I do not have the answer to that question at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Members, any further questions? Yes,
Is there anyone here from the Department of Health?
I don't think so.
Then I don't have any questions.
Okay. Representative Tam, feel free to send me your questions. We can make that connection and get your questions answered. Happy to do that. Members, any further questions? Is there anyone remaining in the room that would like to testify that has not had the opportunity? If so, please come on up. Seeing none. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for... Is there someone online? All right, excellent. Aloha, Christina. Please go ahead.
Aloha. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Christina De Leon. I live on Maui. I work with the Taryn James Young Foundation. I just wanted to quickly say that I am in full support of the Right to Garden. I believe it is a very simple, relatively low-cost step in the right direction for increasing Maui food security. I'm complete with that. Thank you.
Christina, I have a question for you. You say relatively low cost. How much do you expect it would cost to implement such a measure?
I think the only cost might come from the maintenance of the gardens, and that cost would be, it would be the people who are planting the gardens. It would be their responsibility to manage and maintain the gardens, because I know that might be of some concern to HOAs or AOAs if it creates a mess or anything like that. It would be the responsibility of those planting to maintain that garden, and that there may be some cost involved to that. But in terms of long-term solutions for Maui food security, obviously there needs to be a lot more done. It's not going to solve the problem, but it will definitely, put us in the right direction. And it's something that we can start doing now that will make a big difference for our residents.
Thank you. Members, any questions for this testifier? Seeing none. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
All right, so we won't be holding any decision making today. Today was purely for public input. Final call for testimony for anyone wishing to submit comments or testimony. No one else remaining on Zoom?
Oh, excuse me, hold on. Someone is unmuting.
Okay.
We have Amy Agbayani.
Please go ahead, Amy. Please state your name for the record.
Hello, this is Amy Agbayani. I hope it's my turn. I submitted written testimony and it was late. I just wanted to emphasize the needs of limited English proficient communities. They really are left out in a lot of the planning and getting resources. And so we do have written testimony that is basically asking for communication plan and resources to make sure that all members of our community have access to needed food and other resources. So thank you very much.
Mahalo for your testimony. Members, any questions? Seeing none. Members, any final questions or comments? No? All right, then I would like to thank everyone for attending today. I would like to thank HMSO for their work to help draft our working group report, as well as thank you, IT, for your support in doing this. Thank you, members, for taking the time to really learn about the needs of not only Maui in this horrible crisis, but the entire state. Thank you so very much, and we are done for today. Aloha.